Yes, what's happening? Before I get too far into this, let me start out with a little bit of history, a little history lesson here for you. In 1869, a guy by the name of Sylvester Roper produced the first steam cycle in Massachusetts in the USA. So that was one of the first motorcycles made in the USA. However, the engine was a French engine, and he marketed it for sale in 1898. Well, a few years later, 1901, the Indian Motorcycle Company was formed, and they started selling motorcycles. A couple years later, in 1903, the Harley boys, Harley and Davidson, came up with their first production Harley Davidson. They introduced, and Harley Davidson took the largest share of the American motorcycle market at that time. So it still puts Harley Davidson in the front. Indian was a couple years before them in producing motorcycles, but Harley was shortly behind them, and Harley took the lead in motorcycles produced in the USA. So from there, it just kind of snowballed, as you know. Now, some of the argument that I've heard in comments and questions that have been asked me concerning Jap bikes versus Harley Davidson American-made motorcycles. Let me start out by saying, when I first started riding, I rode Yamaha. My first two bikes the first bike I had was a Harley. But I never really got to ride that I was just a kid when I had that thing, and I spent more time working on it. It was a basket case, which means it was a pile of parts that I had to put together. And I never was able to ride that thing on the road. It ended up in another guy's hands. He was going to see if he could get it street worthy, and he never did either. So. But Yamahas were my motorcycle at that time because I couldn't afford a Harley. My dream always was to have a Harley. That's just me. You know, I wanted an American-made Harley. That was, to me, old school biker, and that's kind of where I wanted to be. So I had this Yamaha that I completely stripped down, rebuilt from the ground up, painted it myself and everything. Rebuilt the motor, and for all purposes, a lot of people thought that it was a Triumph. I got asked quite a bit because I had taken all the Yamaha logos off of it, stripped it completely, and it was kind of unrecognizable at that point from everything that I had done to it. But I rode that thing for many years, and I rode alongside Harleys, and because it was a Jap bike, they never gave me any problem at all. Maybe because I didn't have advertised, Yamaha on the side of it or anything. I never had a problem with it. But this goes to the story of the Kamikaze jump. Now, what the heck is the Kamikaze jump? When I first got my Harley, I was kind of introduced to a whole new world. It was kind of weird because I'd been riding my whole life but never saw anything like this before. I was introduced to parties that I never knew existed before, and gatherings of all kinds of sorts that had, a lot of Harley people, a lot of old school bikers and stuff. So it was different. It was pretty neat, and I was really into it. I really enjoyed it. But one of the parties I was introduced to was called the Kamikaze. They said, "Have you ever been to the Kamikaze?" And so, what am I thinking? I'm thinking, oh, Kamikaze shots, you do the shots and you get torched. No. They said, this guy has this property, and it's down in Ashland, Ohio, and he allows bikers to come in there once a year and have this big party on his property, a big private party. And he said anything goes. It's pretty wild. But he has a great big pond in the front yard. And people go down there and they spend the whole weekend and they camp. They camp around a pond. They camp behind the house in the woods. The only thing off limits is his house. They said, don't go in his house. Don't touch his house. But everything else on his property is party time. And then what they do is they jump the motorcycles into the pond, and whoever can jump the farthest into the pond wins the trophy prize. I've never been anything like that, but I rode down there. The first time I rode down there was quite an experience. I went a couple times after that too. It was a heck of a good party. And I don't think they even have it anymore, but I think the last one they had was probably, oh, let's see, what is it now? 2019. It had to be probably 6 years ago or more since the last party they had down there, maybe 7 or 8 years. Been quite a while. I think he just got too old to deal with it. And it was, you know, when you invite that many bikers on your property in one weekend, I guarantee you they trashed the place. So he had his hands full trying to clean up the mess that was left. But as I rode in there, you had to come in off of this little gravel road. It was way back in the middle of nowhere. And they had a gate set up there at the driveway, and only motorcycles could get in to the party. If you had a motor vehicle, a car or a truck, you had to park across the street in the field and then walk in. And I think it was $15 for the weekend or something like that. It was cheap. I mean, it was just a backwoods party. And then once you got in there, you could set up camp wherever you wanted. So people would set up camp, you know, in the front yard, in front of the pond there, out by the street, or they would set their tents up, you know, off to the side of the house or whatever. And then he had bulldozed roads back through the woods too. So a lot of people just camped way back there in the woods. As I remember, there was only a couple RVs, maybe 2 or 3 RVs that ever came there to camp, and they were kind of up by the house where they could plug into the electric or something like that. I don't remember, but everything else was tent camping. You know, you just slept in the tent for the weekend. It was a really crazy party too. When I say anything goes, it was pretty much anything goes. It was wild, a lot of drinking and a lot of carrying on, staying up all night. Motorcycle burnouts and just crazy fanatic stuff going on. But in the backyard behind the house was this great big huge oak tree. It had died many years ago, and the limbs were all hacked off, so it just looked like this great big sculpture with these big stubs, branches sticking out every which way. And they would hoist the Jap bikes up into the tree and hang them like Christmas decorations. Now, I'm not saying if you rode there on a Jap bike, they were going to take your bike and hang it up on the tree. I'm not saying that at all. I think what it was is people would ride in old or bring old bikes in there just for the purpose of, hey, we want our bike to hang up on the tree. So it was kind of cool. They called it the bonsai tree, and it probably had half a dozen motorcycles hanging up there from the branches. It was pretty neat, but it was a little eye-popping for anybody that had a Jap bike too. Now, there's always been this argument about whether, you know, Harley guys accept Jap bikes or vice versa. You know, all the Harley people I've ridden with, I've never heard them complain too much about anybody riding a foreign motorcycle. I hear the guys riding the foreign motorcycles complain more about the Harley people. So, you know, I don't know what the problem is there. There are some really old school bikers, though, that just are really dead set against Jap bikes. If it ain't made in the USA, then, you know, they're not going to let you ride with them. They just soon spit on your shoe. There's still some of those guys around. I'm not one of them. I'll ride with anybody. I don't care what you ride. I really don't care. You know, I can be humiliated a little bit. It doesn't bother me. No, really, seriously. If you ride a motorcycle, good for you. That's what it's all about. But anyway, I would go to this party, and you know, back in those days, I joined the crowd. I was a partier, and I would get pretty lit. And what would happen during the daytime, they would have heats where these guys would bring in these little dirt bikes, and they would strip them all down, clean them all up, and spray paint them with canned spray paint, day glow paint and stuff, just make them look really crazy. And then they had this straightaway that came from the campground up behind the house, and it came all the way down, and there was this dirt ramp that shot the bikes up into the pond. And they would get way back in the back of the campground, come ripping down the hill, and hit that dirt ramp and launch out and see how far they could go out in the pond. Now, out in the pond, they had a pontoon boat with some people out there that would judge distance and whatnot. And they also had a large rubber raft with some, I think they had at least one diver with scuba gear and a couple rescue people that were trained in water rescue. So that when these guys jumped the motorcycle, landed in the water, it wasn't always pretty, you know. They'd get the wind knocked out of them, or they could get hurt. They could break a leg or something if they hit, you know, usually the bike hit the water first, and they'd have to jump off the bike before it hit, or else they would cream right into the steel of the motorcycle when it slammed into the water. Not like hitting ground, but still, it's a pretty good shock when you hit that water at that kind of a speed and height. So it was a pretty good spectacle to watch. And what they would do then, once they rescued the rider out of the water, got him in the raft, they'd bring him over to shore, check him out, make sure he was okay. And the diver would go down, put a cable on the bike, and they'd winch the bike back up to the shore. And these guys would push the bike back to their campsite, clean it all up, get it running again, and get it ready for the next heat, and try to win that trophy. So it was a lot of fun. In fact, one time I remember I was pretty lit during the day, and the people would line up and down the ramp that went, you know, where they'd come flying down out of the campground, and it was quite a crowd there. And I took my Harley, and I rode all the way up into the campground, came around, and I started revving up my engine. I was sitting way up there in the campground, and all the heads turned, they're all looking. And then I just started cranking through the gears and heading right towards that dirt jump like I was going to launch my Harley out into that pond. And people were all cheering and screaming. Of course, I got to the dirt ramp, locked up the brakes, skidded to a stop, and turned and cut through the crowd and went back to my camp. And they were all laughing and cheering, and they thought that was pretty funny anyways, even though I kind of wussed out, you know. Not going to drop my $20,000 machine into the lake anytime soon. It was a lot of fun, though. And hence, that's why it was called the Kamikaze jump. You know, like, you had to be nuts to do it, for one. And it was usually the young guys that did it, the young motocrossers, the little crazier kids. One heck of a party, though. Food, drink, everything you could think of. Went on all night. In the evening, they had a couple flatbed semi-trailers that they butted up, made a big stage up against the woods. So they had... I would call it adult entertainment, some pretty wild stuff. You know, the ladies would lift up their t-shirts and whatnot, and the band would play hard. And it was all good times. It was all fun. And that was the Kamikaze party. No longer is around, but the memories are still there. I've been to a few other parties. I might talk about them in some other videos, but I just wanted to share that one. I thought it was fun. If you ride a Jap bike, you can ride with me. I won't you know, beat on you too hard. And for those that ride Jap bikes that have a problem with Harley riders, oh well, sorry about that. At least ours are made in the USA. Until next time. Now, wait a minute, back up a little bit, because I said made in the USA, and I know I'm going to get rebuttal on that, oh no, some of the parts are, you know, imported from China and blah, blah, blah. I know that, but they're for the most part, they're made in the USA, okay? And it's a US bike. If you like my video, give me the thumbs up. Right down there, hit that thumbs up button. If you liked it a lot, share it with your buddies. Let them join in on the fun. Some of my videos have built a pretty good selection of comments, and they're fun to read too. Everybody chimes in, puts their 2 cents worth in there. I like that. It's a lot of fun. And if you haven't yet subscribed, hit the subscribe button, and you'll be sure to be given a heads up next time I post another video. As you know, my videos aren't all about biker stuff. V and I like to do a lot of other stuff too, camping and hiking, and we throw a little bit of everything in there. But I got to keep my bikers entertained too. Till next time, cats, ride hard and die free.